This afternoon, we are talking about indoor air quality and sanitizing safely. So as you can imagine, this is a really timely topic that we are covering today. So I hope this information is useful to you. We'll also be passing on a lot of resources afterwards via email from this webinar. So don't feel like you need to take notes. Many of the critical resources that I talk about, I will be passing those along to everybody that has joined. Okay, so we are offering this service from Metro's Waste Prevention and Environmental Services team. We are the regional government of Portland, Oregon, serving Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington counties, over 1.5 million people in that region. And the Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department oversees and regulates the garbage and recycling system in our region. And part of that department, our efforts are focused on reducing the toxic waste that ends up going into our landfills or into the recycling system. And we also want to make sure that the toxic products that folks have in the home are being used in a way that minimizes the health effects of those products, and that folks are, aware of ways that they can find safer products. So we're here to help you do that. So why are we talking about indoor air quality today? And what does that have to do with sanitizing and disinfecting? Well, we spend over 90% of our time normally indoors, and we all know that that's even more now that we're in shelter in place. And it turns out that the products that we use inside the home, particularly cleaners, disinfectants, and personal care products, the products that we use on our body and our hair, all of those can actually influence our indoor air quality as well as our outdoor air quality. So it's all a connected system, and knowing more about what products we're using and what potential health effects they have as far as our indoor air quality can help us make some good decisions about minimizing the impacts on indoor air quality. So when we're talking about indoor air quality, that really refers to the air quality within and around buildings such as your home, and as it relates to your health. So there are a lot of different things that can affect indoor air quality, from pollen, which is pretty high here in the Portland area right now. I know I'm affected by allergies, as well as things like mold, pet dander, dust mites, bacteria and viruses. But today we're going to focus on the impact of chemical products, particularly cleaning and disinfecting products on our indoor air quality. So today we're going to cover a few different major things. We're going to talk about how to use safely some of the common cleaning and disinfecting products, with particular emphasis on some of those that are a little bit less toxic. When natural cleaning solutions can actually work well, so even though we want to be sure to have a disinfection step, particularly when we're concerned about the spread of COVID-19, natural cleaning actually has a very good place in the whole process in helping to reduce germs as well, and I'll talk more about that, as well as how to properly dispose of cleaning and sanitizing products. So how are these products that we're using for cleaning and sanitizing affecting indoor air quality? One of the major concerns is what we call volatile organic compounds that are released when these products are used. So I'm showing a spray bottle here, but these volatile organic compounds can come from products that you're using on surfaces that you're not necessarily spraying as well. And these volatile organic compounds can not only be irritants directly for our respiratory system, but they can leak out from our indoor areas into the outdoor environment. And these volatile organic compounds can actually contribute to smog formation. So some recent research is suggesting that the products that we use inside our homes can sometimes contribute to smog and pollutants in cities just as much as cars do. So it's a really important part of what we can do at home to minimize pollution. So these volatile organic compounds can lower indoor air quality, and they can be present as a gas or an aerosol. And I'm showing you an image on the left here that shows the size of a typical raindrop, and then the size of aerosol particles. Aerosol particles are pretty small, but that's actually important in that they can oftentimes hang around in the air for extended periods of time. So these volatile organic compounds as gases or aerosols can then, kind of just be in your air, affecting your respiratory system, or they can drop out of the air and accumulate in the dust. And if they have toxic chemicals in them, that dust can then be contaminated as well. So taking steps to minimize the release of these volatile organic compounds is good. And then making sure that we're doing proper cleaning to clean up that dust that can be contaminated is also a really important step. So what are some of the common products that release these volatile organic compounds? Well, again, one that we're going to focus on today are these cleansers and disinfectants, but also things like paints and paint strippers, aerosol sprays, such as hairsprays. Some of those release volatile organic compounds, air fresheners like Glade or something like that you would be spraying in the air. Even stored fuels and automotive products, as well as pesticides and some personal care products. Now, the volatile organic compounds are really ubiquitous, and they can also be produced naturally by things like trees. But regardless of how they're produced, they can affect our health, and we want to minimize the amount that they're in our environment, particularly in the indoor environment. So when you're looking at products, one of the things that you can do that will tell you how, sort of let you gauge how toxic it is look at whether it falls into one of these three rating categories. Caution is going to indicate these products are a little bit less toxic, will probably release less volatile organic compounds. Warning is kind of mid-range, and then danger is a category you want to try to stay away from, or if you're using those products, make sure you're really using the precautions that are recommended. And it seems like a simple step, but following the instructions for product use will actually really help reduce the air quality impacts of products, particularly those that have volatile organic compounds or other toxic chemicals. Now I want to talk a little bit here about what we're referring to when we're talking about disinfecting or sanitization versus cleaning, right? So cleaning is really your first line of defense in removing things like dirt, grime, and other residues, right? So this step is something that doesn't necessarily kill germs, but it is working to remove the germs, right? And in that process, it decreases the risk of spreading infections. Disinfecting or sanitizing, on the other hand, works to kill germs on surfaces. And I'm going to use disinfection and sanitization a little bit interchangeably here. That is kind of a gray area where sanitizing is basically killing germs, but maybe not necessarily all of them. Whereas disinfectants that are registered with the EPA actually kill a certain number of the germs that they are trying to target, right? So it's like a little bit having to do with exactly how many germs those products are killing. So disinfectants are working to kill those germs, basically inactivate most viruses and bacteria, depending on the particular disinfectant. Okay, so what you can do, especially in this type of time when it's hard to find some cleaners and disinfectants, is really looking at making your own basic cleaners as that first line of defense, and then following it up with your choice of disinfectant if you want to. And we recommend a couple of really easy all-purpose cleaners that you can make at home really simply. The first is an all-purpose vinegar spray that's basically 3 parts water and 1 part vinegar with a little bit of soap. And that's good for surfaces like countertops, baseboards, lots of different surfaces. Whereas the cream scrub is a little bit abrasive, and that's good for things like your bathtub or sinks that have a little bit more dirt and grime and residue. That's just baking soda and a little bit of soap. And I will send this out, but we have a lot of these recipes on our website, which is linked below, but is also will also be available in the resources that I send following this up. So if you can't find your favorite cleaner that you normally use at the store, these are really, really great options for making at home with things you will be able to find easily at the store or online. So when we're talking about disinfecting and really tackling germs, what are some of the things that we can do, and what are some ways that we can make that a little bit less toxic? Well, soap is also a really important first line of defense, and that's why you hear so commonly in the news and so forth that soap is a really good way to decrease the risk of infection, spread of COVID-19. But basically, soap works to weaken the structures and components of bacteria and viruses, rendering them inactive. And this is a diagram of the virus that causes COVID-19 on the right. So that's kind of what the structure looks like. Soap helps to actually just like weaken the entire structure of the virus and deactivate it. You can use Castile or other vegetable oil-based soaps. Those are all good choices, but that's a great first line of defense. And then if we're looking at disinfectants, some less toxic options, more natural solutions include alcohol. And alcohol is a really effective one because it actually deactivates the proteins in many of these bacteria and viruses. So you can see some proteins on the right here, the pink spikes that you see, and inside the bacteria you see those yellow strands. Those also contain proteins. And so alcohol does a really good job at denaturing or basically deactivating these proteins. We recommend a concentration of at least 60% for best disinfecting results. But the nice thing about using alcohol as a disinfectant is that it is not going to produce a lot of the volatile organic compounds and issues with indoor air quality that some of the conventional disinfectants can. So basically alcohol is going to evaporate off and not leave much in the air at all. The same thing is true with hydrogen peroxide. It's really a less toxic option, but very effective as a disinfectant. It basically works to destroy the outer layer of these bacteria and viruses as well as their DNA. And hydrogen peroxide, when it breaks down, it basically leaves water and the rest evaporates off. So no toxic residues or vapors are produced when you're using hydrogen peroxide. So it is a really safe disinfectant, but also very effective. So these, I think, are some less toxic recommendations that we have. Really, soap, alcohol, hydrogen peroxide. These are all very safe choices for cleaning and disinfection. Now, what are some other common disinfectants and how do they work? Well, chlorine-based cleaners such as bleach or ammonium-based cleaners such as Windex, those are also very effective against bacteria and viruses. And basically, they have a whole range of um, actions that they take on bacteria and viruses, but they're quite toxic to them. Because they're actually somewhat toxic to us as well. So when you're using these types of disinfectants, you just want to make sure you're really using the recommended precautions and the recommended safe amounts. And I'll talk a little bit more about what are some ways that you can minimize the indoor air quality impacts of these types of cleaners if you are using, these disinfectants if you're using them to disinfect. Okay, one step is if you're using bleach to dilute it appropriately. So the recommended amount is about 5 tablespoons or 1/3 of a cup per gallon of water. And really, bleach shouldn't be mixed with anything but water. But you do want to have the contact time of that solution with the surface be about 1 minute. And contact time is something that we recommend looking into for lots of different disinfectants. And some people call that the dwell time as well. And that's basically just the amount of time that a sanitizer or disinfectant must be in contact with the surface as it remains wet in order to achieve that advertised effectiveness. As far as, you see the bottles that maybe say 99% kills 99% of germs, right? But you have to hit the correct contact time. So typically those contact times are going to range from 1 minute, as it's recommended for this bleach solution, to 5 minutes, and sometimes even 10 minutes. Now, if the contact time is not listed on the label, I can help you figure that out. The EPA has published some recommendations on contact and dwell times. I'll send that out in the resources, but it can be a little bit hard to decipher. So feel free to contact me as well afterwards with help for that. Okay, so if you're using some of those disinfectants that can have impacts on indoor air quality, like the chlorine and ammonium-based disinfectants, I want to give you some tips on how to use them safely. So some of these seem really simple, but sometimes we forget to do them, right? So one is just opening the windows and running exhaust fans. That's really going to increase airflow and decrease the amount that those volatile organic compounds and other chemicals are staying in the air. It's going to get those out of there more easily. Keep children away when you're using these products, as well as pets. So if you can clear the area for like a half hour or an hour after you clean, that would be ideal in minimizing the health impacts. Another thing is to protect yourself, especially if you know that you're prone to things like eczema, asthma, or other respiratory issues. Wearing gloves or even wearing things like a mask when you're doing this type of cleaning can go a long way in minimizing your health risks. Another one that we don't always pay attention to is not using more of the product that you need. So again, just checking the label and really thinking about how much you actually need to get the job done. That'll help minimize the impacts. And then finally, thinking about what products that you're using, and are there products that you have in your cabinet that, maybe you only use once every year or two, right? The issue is if some of these products are toxic, they're going to be likely off-gassing a little bit as they're sitting there in your cabinet. And so one of the things that you can do is actually just kind of get rid of them if you don't use them very often, because as they're sitting there, they can be affecting your indoor air quality even if you're not using them. So dispose of those containers of old or unneeded chemicals And we'll talk a little bit more about finding where to do that. Okay, so when you're using some of these chemicals, you want to make sure that you're not mixing lethal mixes of chemicals, right? And there are a couple different good rules to follow, which is that most store-bought cleaners that you're buying or disinfectants should never be mixed together, right? But bleach is one that you really want to be particularly careful with, and it tends to be highly reactive, and avoid mixing that with any other product or solution except water, right? And I'll give you some examples of why that is actually the case. So when bleach and ammonia are mixed together, they can produce a pretty toxic gas called chloramine. So we want to make sure we avoid those types of impacts. With bleach and vinegar, that can cause chlorine gas to enter the air, which can also be quite toxic. With bleach and alcohol, that actually can produce chloroform, which if you think of like the movies where people are getting kidnapped and they have a towel over their face to make them pass out, that's oftentimes chloroform, right? We don't want to accidentally, inadvertently be producing that in our home. And then my last example here is hydrogen peroxide and vinegar. On their own, they're really non-toxic, safe cleaning solutions. However, you want to make sure not to mix those two because they can form peracetic acid, which can be a caustic acid. So those are just some examples of things not to mix. Again, on our website, we have green cleaning recipes. All of those mixtures are safe. And if you ever have questions about that, please reach out to me as well. Okay, one of the last things that we're going to cover in this webinar is how to dispose of containers for these cleaning and disinfecting products safely. So again, I mentioned that some of these have toxic compounds that we don't want going necessarily into our garbage and recycling, and we want to make sure that they're dealt with properly. So I have some examples here of the different types of containers that you may encounter with cleaners or disinfectants. And this first example is a Lysol container. This can actually be recycled if the container is empty, but it should be treated as hazardous waste if there's any product left in that container. Now the same is true with this jug of bleach that we have here. Because it's a pretty large jug, it's over 6 ounces. It can be recycled if that container is empty. But if there's anything left in there, you should treat it as hazardous waste and take it to a hazardous waste facility. So we'll talk a little bit more about how to find those facilities at the very end today. I've got some examples of alcohol and hydrogen peroxide containers here. These can both be recycled if these containers are empty, but should be hazardous waste if there's anything left in there. Particularly alcohol can be quite reactive, flammable. We want to make sure that that's disposed of properly if there's anything left in there. Now this is a little bit different. This is a more paper or cardboard based product in this comic container. So we can actually recycle this. This would go into the trash if the container is empty, but it should be also treated as hazardous waste if there's anything left in there. And last example here is a bottle of Windex. So we want to take the lid off here, the spray lid, and we can recycle this if the container is empty, but again, hazardous waste if there's anything left in there. Now, I do want to point out that all of these recommendations, these examples that I just provided, only apply to the metropolitan area of Portland. And if you're in another area, you want to check with your local government on what the rules are there. So I do want to point out that when you're looking at what to do with these products, give us a call at 503-234-3000. That will help you determine where your nearest hazardous waste facility is. And when things get back to normal, maybe there will be community collection events in your area that you can take your hazardous waste to as well. So some other resources that we have for you today, please visit the Healthy Homes website. That we have lots of green cleaning recipes and tips that you can find there on our website. So a really great resource. Again, those green cleaning recipes can be used as your first line of defense for helping reduce germs in general. And then you can follow it with a disinfection step of your choice. We've also got some great resources with one of our partners, Oregon Environmental Council. They have just released a green disinfecting guide, and they have some new green cleaning tips every Friday on their Twitter feed, as well as a fun quiz you can kind of take about how eco-healthy your home is. If you're looking for resources about COVID-19, these are the numbers that you can call in your various counties that you may be in, or visit the Oregon Health Authority's webpage for updates about COVID-19.